Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Weekends with Amit. This week, we have a fantastic subject. I'm sure that we have all of us have spent whatever time we had since our last discussion in whatever best we could have done. If not, there is always a chance to do better the next time. But here, if we look at this subject, physics of the soul, for the uninitiated, it is completely two poles together. Physics is cold science, it has no soul, whereas soul has nothing to do with physics, apparently. Now, these two have been put together and linked together by something that we will learn very soon from the horse's mouth. But before that, let us introduce our other panelists today. So, welcome Dr. Amit Goswami and Dr. Valentina Onisor. How are you?
All good.
Wow, you both look great.
You too.
Okay. Now, coming to this subject, as I was just initially discussing, apparently it's two poles, two opposite poles coming together. So I'll just like to ask the first question to Dr. Goswami. How do you put it together?
Well, quantum physics gives us the adequate instigation to put them together. According to quantum physics, consciousness is the ground of being, and therefore physics no longer is what originally it was thought to be. Namely, physics should be science of inanimate matter. That's the way we learned when I was in school. That's the way they introduced physics. Little did I know that quantum physics has already showed science, because I went to school in the 1940s, but quantum physics was already quite developed, and it was already showing signs that matter is not everything. And therefore, physics, which is the fundamental science, it's not necessarily the science of matter, but it is the basis of everything. That's the way we talk about physics. Physical laws govern everything. And therefore, no wonder that psychologists and other consciousness researchers have been looking for a science of consciousness in the wrong place. They should have always looked at physics, because physics must give us a hint of how consciousness should be introduced in the world. So quantum physics did, and I was one of the very fundamental researchers whose work led to the new interpretation that consciousness is primary, not matter. And then the game changes. The game changes entirely, because then it becomes relevant, all the questions of what happens when we die. That's a very difficult question when you look at from material point of view, because of course our material body dies. That's the nature of matter. Order of matter disappears after a while. It's not forever. And living matter is no exception. But then what about consciousness? If consciousness is not the ground of being, is the ground of being, not matter, then consciousness must be assumed to somehow represent it in our material body. And the question is very relevant. When the material body dies, representation stops, to be sure. Experiences stop. But that doesn't mean consciousness stops, right? And then all those Indian ancient treatises written some 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, they all become relevant. In the Bhagavad Gita, there is these lines that, like clothes, they get kind of shabby after a while. So you have to change them. Similarly, consciousness changes its body, goes from one body to another when we die. Concept of reincarnation. But of course, when you say consciousness, is it the primary consciousness? the one and only oneness, or is it our personal consciousness? Those lines in the Gita does not quite explicate. But theory of reincarnation was developed in the same Vedic culture. And there was a theory of reincarnation where a distinct theory was laid out. What travels is our karma, which means the habit patterns and the character traits that we develop. And so it makes perfect sense, except, of course, people cannot think like that. So they always think in terms of an entity. There must be an entity. And this entity was called soul, Atma in Sanskrit. But of course, is there a surviving Atma? And there confusion broke out because Atma can also be thought of as the consciousness as the ground of being, the whole thing, not the personalized consciousness that we experience in our body as ourselves. But if it is not ourselves, then really think about it. Who cares? Who cares? We only care about ourselves. Strangely, though, quantum physics, the way I could analyze it, took a while, but the theory indeed, again, was able to demonstrate mathematically that it is quite possible that it is the karma that travels. Because the memory of what we live can be divided into two parts. The one part is history, narrative. That narrative disappears with the brain. The other part, as I said, is the karma, habit patterns and character traits, what we learn, capacity of doing things. Now, what things you do and the capacity of doing things, if you think about it, they are categorically different things. And this capacity for doing things, as you increase your capacity of doing things, that capacity, that ability that you have of getting things done, your patterns of habit and your traits of character, karma, that's what travels. If you want to put an entity around it, entity just gives a reference point. We can call that entity soul. Theosophists call it monad. I wrote a book called Physics of the Soul when I theorized about all this. I called it quantum monad. But all that fancy words is just fancy words. So the book was named Physics of the Soul because people generally call it soul in English. And in Sanskrit, they call it Atma, personal Atma. There is also cosmic Atma, Paramatma. Sanskrit word really is Atman, Atma for short. Okay, Jivatman and Paramatman. Jivatman is the personal, Paramatman is the cosmic. Cosmic is synonymous with that oneness. But Jivatman, the container of habit patterns and character traits. That's what goes from one body to another, transmigrates, because that part of the memory is non-local. Now, this word non-local is a strange word introduced by quantum physics. It means signal-less communication, instant communication. Communication without a signal. Signals take time. Signals travel through space, taking time. But if there is no signal, no time is needed. So in that non-locality, that domain of reality doesn't have any space nor any time. So you can die now and you can be reborn in some time in the future at some place which is different from the place you died. Of course, there were subtleties in this. Reincarnational data show that people indeed tend to be born in the same family over and over. They feel more comfortable doing that. When are we making that decision? Probably in the deathbed. In fact, Tibetans who took up the idea of reincarnation very seriously, they use reincarnation for finding who will actually be the one who is the next Dalai Lama. And they give tests to see if the reincarnational memory is remembered by the little boy who will be the Dalai Lama, next Dalai Lama. So Tibetan took the research much further, and there is even a Tibetan book of the dead, beautiful book to read. It talks about the entire death experience as passing through several borders. And the absolute amazing thing that we have today, thanks to our modern science, the amazing thing is that we can verify part of the Bardo experience. There really is a relevance to a travel of an entity container of these habit patterns and character traits. There really is such a concept which makes a lot of sense because part of it has been verified by what is called near-death experience. People actually die, their brain dies. However, doctors, cardiac surgeons, they revive. In the process, a person accumulates potentialities, and those potentialities, when the person is revived, can be collapsed into actuality. Quantum physics allows that. And analyzing this memory of these people, what they describe, we have found out that indeed the first Bardo of Tibetans, which they defined as seeing a bright light, many people indeed, after surviving their death, they report that that's when they came back. Just when they saw the bright light, they got the message also that it is not your time. They're sent back. That's the experience. And guess what? People who report seeing this bright light, they become transformed. They change fundamentally, make a quantum leap of transformation. They become spiritual. Tibetan Book of the Dead says exactly that. They don't have the complete experience because they never went through that. They were stopped, remember, but they got a glimpse of it. That glimpse is enough for you to transform your entire perspective of living. See how enormous this new science can be, and this is just the beginning. Okay, enough of an introduction, I hope.
Quite an elaborate introduction, I must say. But there are a few points which are very interesting here. Life, death, reincarnation, all this is stuff of intense speculation all around the world, always have been. So I just wish to move to Dr. Onisor, and I would like to know on behalf of our viewers, the only thing that can put a stop to any speculation is evidence. So if we look at evidence and look at evidence of reincarnation, what would be your comments on that?
Okay, so this is the question where Professor Goswami will add mostly, but I want to just add from the spiritual perspective first of all, and then let's see where we go. So there is a treaty called Mirabilis Mundi, which says, I'll just tell you this quote, something like that: the life we live is our power and strength, our force of transformation due to the mystic hiatus called death. And here stands the whole magic. We become eternal not by running away from death or denying its inevitability, but by passing through it while still alive. That's something to meditate upon, because the subject was and is still either very fascinating with all that Amit started. I hope it gave you at least an attraction to understand more, or it can be very scary and traumatizing only, or it can be used as a very powerful hiatus, like something which can truly make you do even a quantum leap of transformation for yourself. But also, the more you're aware of what's happening, you can truly help that person which is in this bardo of that. So we have to, when we understand that that is part of life, and when we look at it in this way, it becomes a very, very powerful reminder of what is happening with us. All that fundamental question which many people are not even asking: why are we here for? What happens after that? Why? Because you have to see that we are very much afraid of that because we did not live our life, and we are very much afraid of life, actually. And if you pay attention, I think most of you have been next to a dying person, a very dear person. You see that life becomes somehow very, very intense, and you start asking yourself fundamental questions. Of course, there's this fear of the unknown and fear of a kind of finality, and there are all these reactions which you deal with. Can be courage, for example, for the person in this bardo to embrace his family for the last time. It can be, of course, these tears and all this process of purification, which can appear naturally and which is healthy also. Or people can truly carry in the soul the image of the dear one, which is going through this bardo. Or on the contrary, they can energetically hook and even block his continuation, right? And again, it can be a moment where people can truly change radically the perspective upon life and appreciate simple and meaningful things. You see how many people nowadays they are leaving, like they are departing among us, and so much fear of life, which is leading to this thing. And of course, there are people which are departing because it's their time. What would happen if a person which is very, very ill will continue to get ill, more ill, imagine. So that's again, it's a grace of God when this kind of process, when it reaches to an end and the physical body cannot help anymore, it cannot heal all the body and all the bodies, it has to be this so-called end, which will allow a new beginning. And again, we can help that according to our reactions, of course, according to where we reached ourselves and what we can do. And of course, according to the person which is there. If there is a non-local connection which is established already before that moment, that can help a lot. Okay. And then again, so I'm still continue on that, because it's truly a moment where we can be shaken a lot in a very good way. And we have to see, why are we so much afraid of that? And why are we running away from even looking at that? And because it's the most inevitable thing that can happen to us in our lifetime, right? So it's kind of, we have all these rights and tales about that. In the past, we went through this, and now it's a little bit fading, but still it's there. So what would happen if people's awareness would be turned towards becoming consciousness that we are approaching that with every minute that we live? Maybe our life would become more meaningful, or we would stop chasing this material stuff only and be less individualistic. Maybe we can care more for the loved ones, at least that, right? Maybe we will stop running blindly to just work and back, right? To loans for our cars and houses, to stress and high blood pressure, to, I don't know, to loneliness, right? Because somebody hurt us, so we just choose to be lonely, but instead we are losing this life, which is so precious. So you become aware of this gift of life in the presence of that. So also, how to say, we we would touch differently the people that we worked with, the ones that we love, especially the mother elders, you know, the friend, and we would do so many things differently probably, right? How would we build ourselves as individuals, right? As a family, as a community, as society? And again, you would start asking what are our priorities and values. Once again, many fear that because they fear life. So we have to become aware of the fact that surviving our life is not the same as living our life. I had a very good friend which taught me that long ago, and then I saw it more and more in my life as I went through such event. And again, many fear that because they also fear life. And in this way, the only life strategy we have is just to survive life. And however, this keeps away from us from living life and enjoying these amazing lessons, these amazing opportunities that life is giving us truly in every single second. And we are just kind of pretending that we live our life just because we are doing so many things, yeah? And many of them, of course, they are meaningless and sometimes even stupid, right? Or we are doing kind of anything that crosses our mind, thinking that that's it, you know, but this is just another way to survive. So it's like a survival kit, which has maybe an anti-depression program based on entertainment attached to it. But again, remembering about that is not possible without remembering about life, because there are two phases of existence, the two phases. And you heard about probably memento mori, like remember that you will die, is at the same time memento vivere, remember that you're alive. No, this is an ultimate act of awareness. So the one who is not aware of that is also not aware that he is alive. And even if it seems simple, by just looking around you, you will notice a lot of people who are more like robots, the life being replaced with a lot of schemes, all these patterns that keep the machine running on autopilot. And still we are constantly reminded about life and death by the problems that we face in the everyday life, right? When we are not attentive to them and they take us by surprise, right? When we are, on the contrary, awakened and attentive to our life and to our death, yeah, then the problems lose their scary appearance and they simply become phenomena which we detachedly contemplate and lessons from which we learn, right? It's eventually helping you to go towards the meaning of life, to follow what is that, which is, why are you here for? So again, if that is just a taboo, not because it's so scary, yeah, but because nowadays people became so attached to life that they don't even dare to live it. And not living enough will just increase the anxiety when facing that. So the idea, the more you save, the more you have, yeah, it's making many people unconsciously try to save life for later, but be attentive to that because we don't know when is that moment. It has somehow become the instinct of citizens throughout the world today to live life on this economic mode in order to save for later. Yeah, I knew a very dear person which did the same. Yet something tells us deep inside that this is not according to the fundamental experiences that makes us human beings. Again, think of the intensity in life, which means a lot of risks. And today we are not so good at taking this kind of risks, right? And we try so much to eliminate all the spontaneity and risk from our life because they seem to threaten this safe journey, so-called safe journey through life, yeah? But if we look closer, we see that the only one who is safe in this way is just the ego, yeah? Which is this delusional system that we have created in order to successfully ignore reality as it is and to live in this self-induced reality that's as perfect as our imagination can deliver. So if we dare to laugh a lot, of course we will be exposed to cry a lot, yeah? And the one who risks loving a lot, of course, we risk suffering when love is not well understood. Yeah, and of course, the one who dares to live a lot will also face that a lot, and almost everywhere. You have to meditate about these things and ask yourself, how do you really dare to live your life? Ask yourself now. And when was the last time that you dared to challenge your daily existence with something unexpected, amazing, spontaneous, right? Or how many times did you dare to investigate an unusual fact on your own, despite the warnings about political incorrectness or insufficient scientific data or other warnings, you know? So kind of still trying to keep the surface. Or how many times did you dare to challenge this consensus reality lately and to take a point of view that is radically different from others, for example, So, or how many times did you dare to love without limits lately and without that, the security belt of coolness, even after the first excitement had left your relationship? Right? So all these kind of many questions can be asked, And again, why almost none of these aspects are known by most people today? After all, they are aspects of life, but we treat them in the same way we treat death, with the same paralyzing fear. And it's no wonder that most people today are happy just surviving life, even in conditions of well-being that no other generations have enjoyed, right? We know it seems to be much better than in old times in a way, and then again, we tend to ignore the simple fact that a predictable life, which we strive so much to obtain, gives us an unbearable feeling about the unpredictability of that. So it's kind of an intense and spontaneous life. Unpredictable will include that as a part of it, a turning point, the journey through these amazing lessons. A lot to talk, but again, it's a ringing bell to what the modern concept of being cool is and how this is one of the things which is keeping us from learning and taking the big lessons of death and life.
That was beautiful, Valentina. However, I think we will be running out of time. We have about less than 5 minutes left, I can see. So maybe we will continue it in the next week as well, because I understand that this will be a very interesting topic for all of our audiences, even some of our students, and people would love to hear more about it. But to wrap up, before we wrap up today's program, I would just like to go back to Dr. Goswami once again, and will request you to just give a summation of what you think is best in terms of the very subject that we have been talking about, so that our viewers get the right message about how to look at death, life, reincarnation.
Okay, Valentin already gave a cultural, social perspective, psychological perspective. I won't belabor that. But there is also a spiritual perspective. Why, why do we worry about death so much? In fact, every one of us would like to live forever. Forever. It is our hidden wish. But we don't know how. We know that this body cannot do that. In fact, modern science has established why cells can divide only a finite number of times. There's a limit. Even if you slow down your life by yoga, you cannot live forever. Not in this physical body. Reincarnation is a way that you can live forever. However, it's hard to trust it. So how do you trust it? Let's try to see the nature of memory. We make memories in the brain. What's the difference? Non-local memory. Non-local memory is not in the brain. So where is non-local memory? Non-local memory is what we say is part of our non-local unconscious. So it means there is scope of memory also in the unconscious. This part of the unconscious is called collective unconscious. Collective because all of these predecessors of me, previous incarnations, they too are being, their memories too are being kept in that non-local reservoir, collective unconscious. You have heard of it. Carl Jung discovered it. It's something that is quite well known. So the question is, how do we become a member of the collective unconscious? How do we become a contributing member of the collective unconscious? That's the right way of putting it. If we do that, then we are achieving immortality. Reincarnation by itself gives us a kind of immortality, but This person is not in the forefront anymore. This person is in the forefront if a particular idea that becomes part of the collective unconscious. Then we have become immortal. And that's precisely what happens when we transform, when we discover a new face of an archetype directly. Carl Jung called this individuation. By becoming individuated, this is part of what Valentina and I call quantum enlightenment. A long time ago, a fantastic lady in India, her name is Maitreyi, she said, Yenahang namritasham, tenahang kim kuryam. If a process, if a life does not make me immortal, what will I do with such a life? That's the ultimate spiritual goal of living. If we live entirely for meaning and purpose, for the archetype, sooner or later we discover that one face of an archetype that nobody else before me has known. But after me, they will all know it because it becomes part of the collective unconscious. That's how we become immortal. To that immortality, I'll now recite this very famous Sanskrit verses called Mahamrityunjay mantra. You can repeat after me. The mantra is repeated 3 times. Om Trayambakam Ijamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhunan Ritor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam Ijamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhunan Ritor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Trayambakam Ejamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhunan Ritor Mukshiyamamritat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Well, I don't think we should add anything after this. Let the theme continue. We'll see you next week with the next episode of this particular topic. I hope that you enjoy it. As usual, if you have questions, please send us emails on info@amitgoswami.org. You can even write your comments on Facebook. We will get back to you. Thank you very much and have a lovely weekend.